There comes a moment when the silence feels unbearable. Not because no one speaks, but because no one truly sees you. Most people know what it is to feel invisible in a world full of noise. But stay with me, because Nietzsche believed that when you lose the crowd, you begin to find yourself. The transformation does not come with a crash. It arrives slowly, like fog creeping into the corners of a familiar room. You speak less, not because you lack words, but because you realize most people only listen to reply, not to understand. So you stop filling the silence, and in that stillness, something deeper begins to rise within you. You stop laughing at jokes that cut like knives wrapped in politeness. You stop explaining boundaries to those who never meant to honor them. You stop softening your truth for people who mistake your clarity for cruelty. And this is the beginning of vanishing, not of you, but of the mask you once wore like armor. You are no longer the fixer, the peacekeeper, the placeholder. No longer the one folding yourself into impossible shapes just to fit the emptiness of others. And when you stop playing those roles, something strange happens. People begin to vanish, not in a single instant, but like leaves falling when the season changes. At first you blame yourself. Maybe I am the problem, maybe I have become cold, maybe I expect too much. But beneath the doubt, something else stirs. A voice not heard since childhood, a voice that does not beg for permission, a voice that simply knows. It whispers, you are remembering who you were before you learned to hide, before you taught yourself to dim, before you convinced yourself that being accepted was more important than being real. And with that memory comes grief. You grieve the parts of yourself you silenced, the fire you smothered, the instincts you doubted because someone told you they were too much. But grief is not the end, it is the start of growth. You begin to notice how much of your life was built around keeping others comfortable, how often your silence was mistaken for agreement, how many times your honesty was called an attitude, how your standards were labeled difficult, how your clarity made others squirm. You begin to wonder how much of my identity was just a mask to survive. And here lies the difference between loneliness and liberation. At first they look the same, both quiet, both cold. But one is heavy and the other is spacious. Loneliness says you are alone because you are unworthy. Liberation says you are alone because you stop performing. Nietzsche saw this as the first step of true transformation, the loss of the crowd. He wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. When you stop parroting the opinions handed to you by family, culture, or school, you are not cast out with chains but with silence. Not rejected with violence but with indifference. Because nothing terrifies the collective more than someone who no longer seeks its approval. So if you find yourself eating alone, walking alone, thinking alone, if you notice absence more than presence, if conversations shrink from chatter to honest monologues with yourself, you are not dissolving, you are differentiating. And differentiation is the root of identity. This is not a breakdown, it is a breakthrough. But here is the test. Can you remain in this in-between without turning back? Can you resist reaching for people who only loved the version of you that served them? Can you stay still as your former life decays, trusting that something new will rise? Because if you can, something rare begins to grow inside you. Not louder thoughts, not shallow confidence, but deeper knowing. You start to notice how little others really hear. How often people speak only to be admired, not to connect. How many friendships are built on proximity, not intimacy? How many relationships are nothing more than contracts of mutual convenience? And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. The invitation becomes clear. Stop seeking comfort in conformity. Start finding strength in solitude. This is the threshold Nietzsche spoke of, the beginning of the free spirit, the uncertain space between the death of the mask and the birth of the self. Most people never cross it because the cost feels unbearable. You will be misunderstood. You will be misnamed. You will be mythologized by those who never cared to know you. And you will have to live with that. You will have to stop chasing being seen and start learning to see yourself. That is where the true transformation begins. Because the moment you can hold your own gaze in silence, you no longer need others to confirm your worth. You become sovereign, not because you hold more, but because you need less. And that kind of person, the one who needs less from the world, is the one who can finally give more to it. Carl Jung reminded us, "He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens." To survive the silence is to awaken, to learn that the quiet is not empty. It is full of your own voice waiting to be heard. There is a silence that does not echo, not because it is empty, but because it is full of something deeper than sound. You sit with it now. This heavy stillness that once felt unbearable is beginning to show its rhythm, its pulse, its language. This silence is not a void. It is a mirror, and it reflects only what you are ready to face. You are not who you were a year ago, and not just because of what you lost, but because of what you chose to stop carrying. You let go of people who only loved the echo of you. You stepped away from groups where truth had to be edited to be accepted. You walked away from places that fed your hunger for approval but starved your soul. Now the silence does not chase you. It invites you closer, to sit still, to look inward without flinching. This is the sacred threshold Nietzsche described, the place between everything you have outgrown and everything you have yet to become. It is not a destination but a crucible, because when you begin to differentiate, when you stop being a reflection and start becoming a source, the world resists, not out of cruelty but out of confusion. You used to be predictable. Your compliance kept things smooth. Your silence kept others comfortable. But now you ask questions that are not polite. You say no without apology. You choose solitude over small talk. And you no longer participate in the performance of closeness without intimacy. So people pull back. Not because you became worse, but because you became clear. And clarity is disruptive. It pierces the fog that most people rely on to survive. It unsettles the stories they tell themselves. It interrupts the games they have played for years. You used to play those games too, laughing when it was not funny, agreeing just to avoid conflict, smiling through discomfort because you feared losing people. But the truth is you had already lost them the moment you chose your truth over your image. What remains now is you. Do not mistake this moment for emptiness. What feels like abandonment is often only realignment. The truth is that when you stop being who others expect, you begin to meet who you really are. And that is the person you have avoided the longest. The one who remembers freedom. The one who refuses to settle for polite pain. The one who is not afraid to walk alone because they know who walks with them. The moment you stop chasing relationships out of fear, the dynamics shift. You begin to notice what you once ignored. That some people come close only when they need something. That some applaud your growth until it no longer serves them. That loyalty often means silence in the face of wrong just to preserve peace. But peace without truth is not peace. It is performance. And your soul was never built to perform. So when the calls stop, when the gatherings fade, when those who once orbited your light disappear, do not panic. Pause. Because what is falling away was never real. It was never rooted in your essence, only in your availability. Now that you are no longer available to be used, tolerated, or diminished, you create space. Space for people who do not need you to shrink. People who do not flinch at your silence. People who sit in the stillness with you, not to fix it but to feel it. But before they arrive, there is this middle ground. And this is the stage most people run from. They return to the crowd not because it nourishes them, but because they fear being unseen. But you are still here, and that means something. It means you are willing to stay in the purity of this transformation long enough to see what survives the burning. Nietzsche called this the gateway to becoming the overman. Not someone superior, but someone sovereign. A person who no longer borrows meaning from society but learns to generate it from within. Such a person no longer follows the map because they have become the compass. And that kind of person does not crave popularity. They crave alignment. They do not ask, do they like me? They ask, do I feel alive here? And if the answer is no, they leave. Not out of rebellion, but out of reverence. Because once you have tasted the depth of honoring yourself, you cannot go back to begging others to do it for you. Some doors never need reopening. Some closure is not something others grant, but something you grant yourself. Healing is not a performance staged for applause. It is a quiet revolution undertaken in solitude. Through it all you become lighter. Not because the weight disappears, but because you stop carrying what was never yours. You stop arguing for your worth. You stop explaining your needs. You stop proving your value to people who were never listening. And instead you return to yourself. Carl Jung reminded us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When you sit in silence, you begin to see what has directed you all along. You uncover the voices you obeyed without question. You meet the parts of yourself you exiled to survive. And slowly you begin the work of integration. This is not punishment, it is preparation. Because the silence that once felt like exile is the sound of you finally coming home. You reach a point when everything you thought you needed falls silent. Not with chaos but with clarity. The people you once fought to keep, the roles you once played without question, the masks that once felt like skin, they all begin to slip away. Not because you pushed them, but because you stopped holding on. There is no dramatic collapse, no explosion for others to witness. Just a quiet decision, so subtle you barely recognize it at first. The decision to stop fighting for crumbs. The decision to stop mistaking tension for chemistry. The decision to stop abandoning your own soul for belonging. When that moment arrives, it shifts everything. The ache remains, but it changes its nature. It is no longer the dull ache of pretending. It becomes the sharper ache of becoming. And it hurts not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are finally doing something real. Nietzsche spoke of this stage not as a reward but as a responsibility, because once you have seen through the veil, you cannot return to blindness without breaking something sacred inside. You may try once, reaching back to old patterns, old circles, old versions of yourself. You may wonder if you judge too quickly, if you let go too fast, but when you return, the conversations feel thinner, the jokes fall flat, the connections echo with static instead of signal. Then you understand you did not outgrow the people. You outgrew the version of yourself that needed them. So you come back to the silence, this time willingly. You sit in it not as a prisoner but as a practitioner. You begin to learn its rhythm, its rituals, its memory. Silence remembers every part of you that you tried to bury. And now it begins to return them. You start to notice how many choices were rooted in fear. How often your yes was only panic in disguise. How many times you tried to heal others because you could not bear to sit with your own wounds. So you grieve again. This time not for what you lost, but for who you once were. The one who gave endlessly without asking. The one who tolerated because they feared being too much. The one who stayed silent to keep the peace while their soul ached in the background. And as you grieve, you begin to change. Not all at once, not in ways visible to the world, but quietly within. You stop proving. You stop defending. You stop justifying your need for depth, for space, for truth. You begin building rituals no one else sees. Morning silences, long walks, unrushed meals, moments with yourself that feel like home. You stop seeking permission to exist fully. You start granting yourself that permission without apology. And as you embody this, others begin to appear. Not the ones you lost, but new ones, different ones. They move slower. They speak with intention. They do not demand access to every part of you. They simply value your presence. They do not applaud to feel superior. They resonate because they too have walked through the silence. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said, "Become who you are." Not who you were told to be, not who you became to survive, but who you have always been beneath the noise. And that person is not lonely. That person is whole. Loneliness was never the truth. It was only the signal of self-abandonment. Now that you have returned to yourself, you begin to see differently. You no longer fear solitude, because you no longer feel alone in your own presence. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This privilege is not handed to you by others. It is claimed in silence, in grief, in the willingness to be misunderstood. It is lived through choices no one applauds but you. So when people misunderstand you, when they call you distant or unreachable, let them. They have only known connection through chaos. They do not yet recognize peace as love. They mistake urgency for intimacy. You do not need to correct them. You do not need to explain. You simply keep walking, quietly, consistently, deeply, because the way you live becomes the teaching. And one day someone will sit across from you and say, "Being around you makes me feel like I can be myself." And you will smile, because you know that is how transformation spreads. Not through performance but through presence. Not through noise but through becoming. If you have no friends right now, if the silence feels heavy, if you wonder whether this path leads anywhere, know this: you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are becoming. Becoming is lonely, not because you are destined to be alone, but because not everyone is destined to come with you. This is your rite of passage, your sacred unraveling, your cosmic reset. You are not empty. You are being cleared. You are not rejected. You are being rerouted. You are not unlovable. You are learning how to love without losing yourself. So rest here. Let the silence hold you. Let the grief pass through you. Because on the other side of this quiet is the self you were always meant to meet. And that self will never abandon you, because they have walked with you through every storm. They have waited beneath every mask. They have whispered in every moment you tried to leave yourself. And now at last you have heard them. You have returned. There comes a time when silence is no longer exile. It becomes your ground. At first it felt like abandonment. Now it feels like alignment. You no longer crave noise to confirm your existence. You no longer need applause to validate your steps. You walk quietly, not to be unseen, but to be true. And truth is enough. This is integration. The fractured pieces of yourself begin to weave back together. The voice of the child who once hid in fear. The fire of the youth who once burned too bright. The wisdom of the one who has walked through storms. All sit together now in the same inner house. You do not need to erase the weaker parts. You lead them. You do not destroy the shadows. You integrate them. You do not abandon the fragile self. You listen to it, and in doing so, you become whole. Carl Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Every choice toward order, toward truth, toward presence is proof of becoming. And each time you choose, you strengthen the structure of your inner kingdom. This is sovereignty, not the rule of others, but the governance of self. The crown is not handed by society. It is claimed by remembering who you are beneath every disguise. You stop chasing belonging at the cost of your essence. You stop bartering your truth for temporary approval. You stop editing yourself into fragments so others can stay comfortable. And suddenly you notice a shift. Peace begins to settle where chaos once lived. This peace is not fragile. It is not the shallow calm of comfort. It is the deeper calm of integrity. The kind that remains even when storms rise outside. The kind that whispers, "You are aligned, stay steady." Now when people approach, you no longer ask, "Will they accept me?" You ask, "Do I stay true here?" If the answer is no, you walk away, not with bitterness but with reverence. Because once you have honored yourself, you cannot return to begging others to honor you. Some people will misunderstand. They will call you distant, aloof, unreachable. But that is only because they have only known intimacy through chaos. They do not yet recognize that peace can be love. That stillness can be presence. That silence can be devotion. Let them learn in their own time. You do not need to correct them. You do not need to prove anything. You simply keep walking with nothing to defend, nothing to hide, nothing to perform. And this is the quiet crown. The authority that comes not from dominance but from alignment. Not from noise but from presence. Not from the crowd but from the self. Nietzsche once wrote, "Become who you are." Not who you were told to be. Not who you had to become to survive. But who you always were beneath the noise. Now you begin to see it clearly. The rituals you once performed for survival have fallen away. The rituals you now build are rooted in remembrance, morning stillness, breathing with intention, choosing depth over distraction, choosing presence over performance. Each act is not loud, but it carries weight. Each decision becomes a brick in the architecture of sovereignty. And the more you honor this rhythm, the lighter you become. Not because the weight disappears, but because you no longer carry what was never yours. This is the quiet revolution, not staged for applause, but lived in the unseen moments. Not celebrated with noise, but embodied in consistency. Not about proving value, but about living from it. You begin to attract those who resonate instead of those who consume. They move slower. They speak with clarity. They respect your boundaries because they have walked through their own silence. And suddenly you realize you no longer need many. You only need the few who see you without asking you to shrink. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That privilege is now yours. It was never given, it was claimed. Claimed in solitude, in grief, in the courage to sit in silence without fleeing. Now peace does not feel like absence. It feels like arrival. You are not performing love. You are embodying it. You are not borrowing meaning. You are generating it. You are not seeking a throne outside. You are seated firmly on the one within. This is integration. This is peace. This is sovereignty. To walk into the life you are meant to live, something must die. Not your body, but the version of you that betrayed you. The one who promised and broke it. The one who silenced his own needs to keep others comfortable. The one who called survival strength while slowly abandoning the soul. That self cannot walk forward with you. He has carried you as far as he could, and now he must be laid to rest. But this is not a death of hatred. It is a death of honor, because even that old self was a guardian. He softened your hunger so you would not frighten others. He slowed your steps so you could stay in the crowd. He avoided risk to shield you from failure. He was not an enemy, he was a protector. But his role is finished. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Pain is the initiation, the crossing from who you were to who you must become. And every time you resist discipline, every time you return to distraction, you are clinging to the old self who no longer belongs here. Transformation requires grief. You must mourn the man who kept you safe but small. You must thank him and let him go, because until you grieve him, you will continue fighting him. And the more you fight, the less energy you have to build. Failure itself becomes the mirror of this truth. When you fall, it is not proof of weakness. It is evidence of a divided self. One half walking forward, the other half still anchored to survival. Until you integrate, you will repeat the cycle. You will call it laziness, but it is grief unfinished. But when you finally accept the death of the old self, something shifts. Failure no longer defines you. It becomes initiation. It becomes instruction. You fall, you rise, you learn, you repeat. And each repetition strengthens the new identity forming within. Nietzsche once observed, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." But strength is not born in the avoidance of failure. It is forged in the fire of falling and standing again. The only way to grow is to allow part of you to die. So let the old one die, the one who broke his own word, the one who numbed his soul with distraction. the one who mistook approval for love and silence for peace. Lay him to rest, not with anger but with gratitude, because when you release him, the energy you once spent pretending is freed. That energy is fuel. Fuel to build mornings of clarity instead of chaos. Fuel to create routines that ground you even when motivation fades. Fuel to shape habits that are not cages but foundations. Order is not a prison. It is armor. And in a world drowning in noise, a calm and structured man carries a power few understand. He does not shout to prove himself. He does not beg for attention. He simply stands steady, consistent, sovereign. This is the essence of transformation. Not the absence of failure, but the redefinition of it. Not the denial of pain, but the integration of it. You are no longer running from death. You are allowing the false parts of you to die so the true self can rise. The Stoics reminded us, he who fears death will never live as a free man. And Jung would add, what you resist not only persists but grows in size. The more you resist the death of the old self, the stronger his grip becomes. But the moment you accept him, honor him, and release him, he dissolves. So do not fear this death. It is not the end of you. It is the unveiling of you. The stripping away of every mask until what remains is raw, whole, alive. This is the sacred exchange. The old self laid down. The new self rising. Not perfect but real. Not finished but faithful. And with each day you choose presence over distraction. Truth over performance, structure over chaos. The old self fades further. What remains is a man no longer defined by failure but refined by it. A man who does not beg for permission to exist fully. A man who has walked through his own funeral and returned lighter. This is transformation. Not loud but irreversible. Not glamorous but essential. The quiet rebirth that only those who have faced death within themselves can understand. At the highest stage, discipline is no longer struggle. It is no longer hype or adrenaline. It is no longer a battle between the old self and the new. It becomes ritual. You wake not because you must, but because you are ready to meet your vow again. The morning is not punishment but reunion. The silence you once feared now greets you as an ally. And within that silence you hear the rhythm of your own life. You train not to prove anything. You train to remember yourself. You eat with intention not out of vanity, but because your body has become the temple of your resolve. You work not to impress but to align. Every act becomes part of a rhythm. Every choice echoes the truth you now live. This is when discipline ceases to be performance. It becomes identity. Carl Jung wrote, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of the self, but by integration of the contraries. Discipline is the outward reflection of that inner integration. It is the architecture of a unified soul. You no longer ask, how do I stay motivated? Because motivation has no place here. You no longer chase inspiration, because you have become the source. You no longer force yourself into discipline, because discipline is simply who you are. The fractured self has dissolved. The shadow has been met and integrated. The inner king has returned to the throne. And when the king sits, he does not shout. He stabilizes. He orders. He embodies. This is sovereignty. Not dominance over others, but mastery of the self. Not authority borrowed from approval, but authority born of alignment. The crown is quiet, but it cannot be taken from you. Now peace arises. Not the shallow peace of comfort, but the deep calm of coherence. You feel steady even in chaos. You feel anchored even in uncertainty. You walk with a presence that does not demand attention, yet cannot be ignored. Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." Now you understand that becoming was never about striving to be more. It was about shedding what was false. It was about releasing what was never yours to carry. It was about returning home to yourself. And this return is not loud. It does not seek recognition. It is lived in the rituals no one applauds but you. The early mornings of stillness, the meals eaten in gratitude, the hours shaped by focus instead of distraction, the evenings closed with honesty instead of noise. Slowly, the man you once dreamed of is no longer an image in the distance. He becomes the reflection in the mirror, not perfect but real, not flawless but whole. And people begin to notice. They may call you distant, but you know it is clarity. They may call you unreachable, but you know it is presence. They may not recognize peace as love, but you no longer need their recognition, because you are no longer asking to be seen. You are seeing yourself. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." You are living that privilege now, not waiting for others to grant it, not waiting for the world to confirm it, but carrying it in your breath, in your choices, in your rituals. This is the final transformation. Not productivity but sovereignty, not efficiency but presence, not noise but peace. So walk quietly, walk deeply, walk faithfully, because the way you live will become the teaching. And one day someone will feel your presence and say, "Being around you makes me feel like I can be myself." And you will smile, because you will know that is how the light spreads, not through preaching but through becoming, not through force but through alignment, not through noise but through silence. The silence that once felt like exile has become your home. The discipline that once felt like struggle has become your rhythm. The identity that once fractured has become whole. And in that wholeness you have found the quiet crown, the peace of a man who finally keeps his word to himself.